Good evening, members. Before we start, it is a warm evening, and if you haven't done so already, gentlemen may remove jackets. Ladies, well, I'm not going to advise anything on that. Thank you very much. Before we start the committee meeting, real as it were, we have a presentation this evening from Headcorn Aerodrome, who will be briefing us on their updates, and I'd like to bring forward to the desk Mr. Jamie Freeman, ably assisted by Councillor Martin Round. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Chair, for this opportunity of presenting what will be a very brief and simplistic overview of what happens and what we propose to happen at the aerodrome. We all know that the world is full of some pretty awful stories with doom and gloom all over the place. But gladly, I think this committee knows that Maidstone has plenty of good news stories. And I'd like to think that with those many good news stories that we do here, that the Archbishop's Palace is one of the gems with the river in the city, in the town itself. We've got Mote Park, but in the outer areas we've got lovely countryside, vineyards, and we've got Headcorn Aerodrome. So we've got plenty of assets. What we need to do is turn them into real opportunities. So before I tell you about some of our plans, one of the things I really want to do is let people know about some of the history of Headcorn, for those that don't already know. The Freeman family started the aerodrome in 1927. But, of course, a few years later, all of a sudden there was a thing called World War II, where Lashendon Aerodrome became a base for the World War, and ultimately it was taken over by mainly Americans and Canadians. It still remains a family-run farm. In fact, in the middle of January to March, you will see the lambing season in full activity. The aerodrome in itself may appear to be just an aerodrome with a few planes and a few hangars at the side of it, but it is very much not only a farm, but a business of many businesses. Businesses and many different sources of income. Planes naturally land and take off. They stay a while. Much like boats do in rivers, they have moorings or they pitch up. It all produces some form of income. It's almost like a campsite. In fact, at times it is a campsite. Some people will stay permanently. Some people have their planes serviced and maintained. So many services happen, and even more services are provided. Even catering, there's a bar, lots of other services, and there's even a fair amount of small sleeping accommodation for those that stay over. Of the many planes we have there, we have mapping companies, companies that take aerial photos, people teach people to fly. There's a massive parachuting area there, so naturally planes take people up and down. There will be days when there are absolutely massive charity events taking place. For instance, the Think Pink Cancer campaign. My partner's actual niece was there only a few weeks ago, taking a tandem jump and raised substantial amounts of money for her particular charity that day. But the following day there was wing walking going on the biplanes. So there's lots of things taking place. You can learn to fly a helicopter, a microlight, a plane of any description, and you can also do hot air ballooning. I think it was last night or the night before, the Virgin balloon was there, Shepherd Neame's Spitfire balloon was there, and at least two others were there. That was on Sunday night, which was a very good ballooning night. Naturally, the aerodrome has to be approved and fully licensed, and is subject to various planning laws and licensing laws. It's also still registered by the Ministry of Defence. So, I think it was 3 or 4 weeks ago, we had a collection of Puma helicopters doing a rehearsal for real battle that suddenly arrived. The Ministry of Defence can do that, and they do. We also have rehearsals taking place for dangerous things at Headcorn Aerodrome, for which I sometimes get phone calls from local residents complaining. But because it's a rehearsal for real defence work, most of my residents actually like the idea that Headcorn's part of something really important. We have many different planes. In fact, the variance of planes is quite considerable. In the last few days, we've had a couple of interesting planes arrive. But generally, we've got Tiger Moths, we've got a Harvard, a de Havilland Dove, which is a passenger-carrying type Second World War RAF plane for carrying people. So it's a mini airliner, I suppose. 12-seater, I think it is. Correct me if I'm wrong. Nine-seater. And of course, we've got the Spitfire. The Spitfire is absolutely a tremendous lure for people that want to come and see it. And the business is run by a company called Aero Legends, that side of the business, for which they charge astronomical amounts for you to fly in that plane. Or you can accompany it in a helicopter or go up with the Tiger Moth and watch it and take photographs of it, all of which brings in money. But there are other companies there. There's another company called High Flight, for instance. They maintain big aircraft based at the London airports. They, in fact, call themselves glorified decorators and shop fitters. But actually, they literally strip out the insides of fuselages for very large planes and actually rebuild them. Everything from the seals and the windows to the seats, the carpets and everything on the inside of a plane. The Parachute Club actually brings in hundreds of people every week. And then there's the engineering side. And only today, as I was bringing Jamie here today, he's just sent some of his engineers off to Spain to go and sort out a plane with a bit of trouble over there. That engineering side is a very significant part of the business at Headcorn Aerodrome. Like cars need MOTs, planes need regular maintenance. When they're old planes, like the Spitfires and the Tiger Moths, they need particular care and attention. And it's actually very expensive to maintain such planes. But Shenley Engineering, based there, can do almost anything it comes down to. If they don't have the actual skills, they've got access to people like wheelwrights, upholsterers, and very skilled engineers that can do a variety of things with planes. And then we have, and the person most appropriate for it is sitting over there, Caroline Matthews, we have a particularly wonderful actual museum that's now going through considerable expansion, and it's got so many artefacts that kept in container lorries at the back of the place, and they're only just moving into new buildings, and it's still work in progress, but it's going to be a very significant museum, and for those that particularly like old engineering and old history, it is a wonderful place. Once they can get all these artefacts and things out, it'll be particularly great to see the place. And then to keep the buzz going and making money, the aerodrome has many events. Not only do we have car boot sales and things like that, we have car rallies and we have major flight events. Most of these events are usually free to see, but the big events are usually charged. Having said that, when we get large events, we get anything up to 16,000 people per weekend at the aerodrome. That's quite a fairly big logistical exercise in terms of movement of people, and it brings enormous amount of custom to local areas. The local campsites usually totally chock-a-block with people. The hotel, the bed and breakfasts love the business, and people like even the pilots need somewhere to stay for these events. So it becomes quite a significant event. Even when it's a free weekend, there's usually a fair amount of tourism that takes place because literally we are halfway between Leeds Castle and Sissinghurst Castle. So therefore we are on a sort of large critical mass of major tourism activities. When we had the Vulcan come into Headcorn 2 years ago, I can honestly say that the whole village and Frittenden and Smarden, the neighbouring villages, were completely awash with fields of campers for that actual event. And that gave a significant amount of business to the whole area. So the aerodrome is very good for business for us. And the other thing the aerodrome does, particularly things like Remembrance Day, is Headcorn itself the aerodrome takes its tiger moths up and drops poppies over our remembrance service. That is either 2 minutes or 3 minutes past 3 every Remembrance Sunday. It's a nice little thing that the aerodrome does for the village. So that's some of the things that the aerodrome does. But as for the future, we've recently been given approval for a culture and heritage lottery bid. Now, as anybody knows, these are very big tasks. They have an enormous amount of criteria to fill, but we will achieve it. Our plans are to do it properly, not to rush into it. The whole bid is based on the history and heritage of that aerodrome, and particularly on the fact that we have a genuine World War II hangar that's still operational and still in use, and it's actually where the engineering takes place. Plus the fact that, of course, we've got the Spitfire and Tiger Moth are virtually resident there all the year round. But what we need to do is provide facilities for those Spitfires and Tiger Moths so that there's no dampness, there's no excessive heat, they're well protected, it's well ventilated, and they can be appropriately looked after for 12 months a year. In order to do that, we are talking about a hangar and a facility that will cost several £million. But once we've got that, to achieve something for what we've already got, we will have a business model to take on even more. We'll be able to take on more precious classic planes, and there are a number of other classic planes that are interested in coming to Headcorn at the moment, added to which there are a number of other people that have shown interest in the potential project. There's a couple commonly known as the Queen and Prince Philip that have actually shown a great deal of interest in the project, and they're potentially able to offer us a couple of their carriages. The Queen's carriages or Prince Philip's carriages would go down very nicely to what we originally thought would be a heritage aviation centre, but now it looks like highly likely to become a transport and aviation heritage centre. And as a result, words got round because people in the aerodrome, we have fairly large networks and contacts, so therefore we have a lot of people that spread the word. And so I've even had offers of Formula One racing cars to come and join the collection if at all possible. And a few other interesting events, including a Reliant Robin that used to be used by Del Boy Trotter. Anyway, these plans will happen. One way or another, they will happen, and what they could do is bring more business to Headcorn, be it planes or carriages or whatever. One of the reasons why I'm particularly here tonight is, of course, Maidstone is well known for carriages. It has a Carriage Museum. Sadly, they are not in the best of condition. They are somewhat deteriorating, and they may deteriorate further in a building that potentially is not exactly the right amount of heat, the right amount of dampness, or the right amount of heat at certain times. So potentially, if anyone would ever to consider it, those carriages would be well suited in our museum when we ultimately get it going. And when you consider the Queen's armouries have earned an awful lot of money for Leeds in a very much better display, then I think that all we can do is offer more potential, a better facility, and potentially more jobs for the whole of Maidstone. Okay, it's a big project. There's a lot of logistical problems. I'm glad to say that Dawn has been really helpful in assisting us in some of these logistic areas already. We have to go through a planning regime, but we've already had the pre-app on it. Richard Timms has been fully aware of what's going on. And as well as that, we've got local people that we need to be talking to work up our project, and we're already working that up. For instance, one of the conditions that the lottery require is an interaction with schools and colleges with the facility. So therefore we're working up a number of projects in terms of that respect. So whilst there's a long way to go, the project is going to happen. So there's a lot to talk about, a lot to ask for, but what I'm asking for this committee to do is to actually put it on your work programme to see how much we can work up towards this ultimately over time. And for those of you with any questions, by all means, ask them now. But What I will do, on behalf of Jamie and myself, is we'd like to invite any one of you and any other council member to the Battle of Britain show taking place this weekend at Headcorn Aerodrome. You'll be more than welcome to join us on Saturday, where and I've also asked the Deputy Mayor over there, to assist me in this quest, to do tours and escorts around the aerodrome, because actually the Deputy Mayor, as is now, and the former Mayor as was, do actually know the aerodrome quite well. And I have to say, in terms of the legislative process of looking after it, Councillor Perry over there is also on the consultative committee, so he also knows the place pretty well. So we have a number of people that know the place and could do the relevant tour. So anybody who wants to come and join us at the Battle of Britain event on Saturday is more than welcome to be there as our guests. And please let me know within 24 hours by email, please. I'll open it up to questions, and Jamie is ever so keen to answer them.
Thank you, gentlemen. We weren't going to do questions this evening, but I will allow, if there's any urgent questions now, I will allow a question. Councillor Cox.
You put a time frame on how far along you are and when you think something might be built that could house other things. I mean, you didn't say when you're going to be starting this, or...
One of the things I did say is that we believe getting the Heritage and Lottery bid is essential to get it right. And as most people know, you have windows of opportunity for bidding. We don't believe we're going to be getting it into the next one, and I'm not too sure we'll be getting it into the April-May window either. We've still got a fair amount of work to do before we bid up. So if we bid, I would imagine the bid will be made in approximately a year, which means that it'll take at least 6 months to a year to follow through. From a planning point of view, it's a lot easier.
Thank you, gentlemen, very much for the update. And I think going forward, we may be able to arrange with you a visit for the committee at some stage. I think we were hoping to do that in the future. Going forward, we will arrange a visit. I'm sure members may take up your offer of going on for the Battle of Britain weekend. But thank you very much for the contribution. It's been a great update, and it sounds good where you're going. So let's hope you wish you the best of luck on your endeavour. Just noting Councillor Blackmore has joined us. Thank you very much. Get to the business of the evening. Good evening, members. Welcome to this edition of Heritage, Culture and Leisure Committee on the 4th of July 2017. Before we get to the agenda, may I just take this opportunity to advise you that we are not expecting a fire alarm to sound tonight. So if it does, please remain seated, and Mrs. Matthews will assess the situation and give further instructions on the evacuation of the building if appropriate. Tonight's proceedings will be webcast by the Council, but if anyone is intending recording these proceedings, can you please let me know now? I ask this question not to stop you, but merely to ensure that members and other members of the public in the room know that this is taking place. Members, you will see in front of you some amendments for item 12. I've let them come out now, so you have some time to digest those before we get to item 12 this evening. We always have a good news section in this committee meeting, and tonight is no exception. I had an honour, and it was a great event to be asked to go to Beauvais on the Cultural Exchange for the annual Jean Hachette Festival last weekend, or the weekend before now, I think it was. They really, the things I learnt on this particular event was how to put on an event in a big way. And it was very nice to be able to represent Maidstone with the Mayor. And we've done a lot of networking, I think they call it in the modern jargon. And I know that we've made some great improvements whereby choirs and orchestras and other things will happen between us and also the German town of Witten. So I think we can see a resurgence of that link with Beauvais. They're great friendly people and they're keen to keep us with them going forward. So any thoughts the committee might have in that direction, I'd be pleased to hear them. I'm going to ask Wendy, as she's the chairperson for the Beauvais Twinning Association, if you'd just like to say a few words on that.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. This year we decided to open up the committee. We get 2 free places every year that they send to us. And this year we thought, well, it's good for other members of the committee to go. So David went, and another lady called Teresa, who's worked really hard with the choirs, and she's arranged now for is it the Maidstone Choral Society, Choral Society, to go over and actually sing with the Beauvais one in the cathedral. And the cathedral's wonderful, as David well knows. So that's happening this year, and this is something that's never happened before. But what we desperately need, and I'm going to have a plug here, we desperately need members for the Beauvais Twinning Association here. We're trying desperately hard to arrange events to bring some money in because we no longer get funding, any funding at all, from the council. And I think over the years, it's been given a bad name by certain people who think it's all a jolly. And I think David will actually agree with me when it's not a jolly. It's jolly hard work. It's very hard work, but it's been well worth it. So I would actually like, if you could, please, we want people to support us. So if you look into it, I think, you can find it from the outside bodies. We still need councillors to be represented on the outside bodies. So I think David has had a real awakening the last couple of weeks to know how actually wonderful they are and how much they actually value our friendship. And I think that will go on no matter what happens with Brexit. I think over the years, we've been twinned with them for many, many years. And I really would like it, seriously, to go on. And I think it could be quite an asset to Maidstone, especially with the cultural visits that we are trying to encourage. So I'm really pleased that you enjoyed it, David. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Linda. It seems like a lot of events happening, but it is the summer season. Last Saturday, we had the big day out in Mote Park, and I can report that over 9,000 families, both children and adults, obviously, enjoyed a great day out. And I know committee members did attend that, and I think we were really pleased with how well that went. And, of course, we were blessed with good weather, but it was nice to see so many families enjoying the park and enjoying the events there. And I think Dawn went as well, did you?
No, unfortunately.
Oh, right. That's right. Yeah. But it was a wonderful event, and good to see that we did a good job. And we have to thank our parks team for doing a good job there. Got some good news from the museum. New website won gold at the Kent Digital Awards for its designers, The Hideout. They would advance to the National Awards in the autumn. And for those of you who love board games, the current exhibition is Game Plan, A History of Board Games, and this has had a significant amount of media coverage. And if you remember the Lego sessions they did 2 years ago, I think you'll find it's just as exciting. There's games in the museum I didn't know existed, and there's some games actually they're missing. So it'll be interesting. I'm looking forward to the late night where we can actually play some games. So I urge you to go and promote it, and I'll take you on at Monopoly if I can. Just to remind you, members, I did send a letter at the start of the season, as it were, for committee leads. I'll just remind you what they are in case you want to get more involved. There's one for DMP, Destination Management Plan and Festivals. The other is for the Hazlitt Theatre, and the other is for the Leisure Centre. So if you feel like getting more involved, like Diana Lewins has, Councillor Lewins, then please see me, please ask. It's nice to have champions on certain sessions, so it helps the link with what we're trying to achieve. Just a few dates for your diaries. I think you probably know them already, but I'll just highlight them. Maidstone International Arts Festival is now on, and the Mayor's Gala concert is on Saturday the 15th of July. On Sunday the 16th, there's the new Mela in Mote Park, and on the 28th to the 30th of July, there's the Rambling Man in Mote Park. And just before we get back after the summer recess, on the 1st to the 3rd of September, the new Multicultural Food and Drink Festival will be held in Mote Park. So, lots of great dates there, people, and, members, and do please try to attend and spread the word. So, there's a lot going on in Maidstone this summer. Very much. Right, that's me. Received item 1. I've received apologies from Councillor Mrs Wilson and Councillor Mrs Fort. Do we have substitute members, please? Councillor Cox.
Councillor Cox for Councillor Wilson.
Thank you very much. Welcome to the committee. Councillor Perry.
Councillor Perry for Councillor Ford.
Thank you very much. Can I take this opportunity to congratulate you on your elevation to chairman, leader of the Conservative group? It's the first time you've been since then, I think. And we always do like to see you at this committee. I know you enjoy coming. Thank you.
Well, thank you, David, very much. That's much appreciated.
I have no urgent items tonight, members. Do we have any visiting members? Would you like to come forward? Councillor Harper, would you like to come forward and say which items you wish to speak on?
Item number 12 and number 13.
Thank you very much. That's good because we only have 2 items. That's marvellous. Thank you. Very good. Councillor Nagy.
Councillor Nagy, and if I raise my hand, I would like to be allowed to speak. So
Need to say what.
Well,
which
I'll
item
cover
you
all
wish-
the items, then I can speak on anything.
12 and 13. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying.
Okay. Give me options open. Thank you very much.
Councillor Round, purely observing out of courtesy after the presentation you offered me.
Thank you, Councillor Round. You're most welcome. There are no disclosures by members and officers, or if there are, I'll hear them now. We have no disclosures of lobbying, unless we have any now. To consider whether any items should be taken in private because of possible disclosures of exempt information, I propose, members, that we take all items in public as there are no exempt. Is that agreed? Thank you very much. Item 8, minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of June 2017. Take these in page order as ever. Page 1. Page 2. Page 3. Councillor Batmore.
Chairman, where it says resolved under item 3, the 220,000 set aside in the capital programme to be invested in the expansion of the car park and improvements to disabled access, my understanding was we weren't necessarily going to use, or not all the money would be used, only part of it would be used. Is that correct? I didn't think we'd actually agreed that all of it would go towards the improvements plus the car park.
Can we just check on that? Dawn, do we have any information? Yeah. We haven't got an officer here tonight that can actually answer that question, so can we refer it to them and come back on that? Thank you very much. Unless any committee members do recall. No. Page 4. And page 5. Thank you very much, members. Presentations of petitions, there are none this evening, and there are no question statements from members of the public. Item 11, members, committee work programme, which you have before you. I will just mention one item that was to come tonight, the Flaxen People protocol, but it is, say delayed, is still in the melting pot and will come to us in September. Are there any questions on the work programme? Councillor Blackmore.
There seem to be an awful lot of items for September. Are you really suggesting that we take all those items, or will some of them possibly or potentially be deferred to later in the year?
I think Councillor Butler asked this question for November last time, and I know that we had an awful lot for November. That seems to have slipped down to September, but I think there will be some items deferred from that. It is a large agenda, and I know the nights are drawing in, but there are time limits on these things. But I think you'll probably find when we get to the next issue, it'll slim down slightly. Does that? It is a heavy agenda at the moment, but
I can just see a couple of possibly contentious items in September. I mean, if nothing slips, is it worth putting in a provisional date, just in case we don't go through the agenda, because it is quite significant?
I do agree. We're not meeting in August, so what I will do, I do meet regularly with officers and look at the work programme. If I feel that towards the dates that we need to look at it again, then we will.
Bearing in mind it's always difficult to put slot meetings in, would it not be worth looking at a date now? You've got it there as a provisional. You don't have to use it. I just feel if you wait till the 1st of September, there could potentially be a missed opportunity.
Yeah, have a meeting with officers tomorrow. I will bring that up and we will discuss it. Because we obviously don't want a heavy one in September, and there's an opportunity to spread things a little, I feel. But we'll update you. We'll send an email out. Councillor Nagy, did you indicate?
Thank you, Chairman. Obviously, I sat on the committee last year. Where would the updates be, what happened last year? As an example, the Maidstone United, what's the update on that? Would that be somewhere in this work programme, or is that, as it comes up, someone will report back to the committee?
As you know, that's still being investigated by officers again, and we haven't had an update yet. We will do, and it will come back to the committee when it is ready to do so. I think we're looking at some policy items at the moment, and it will come back to us when it's been sorted, if you like. I hate to say sorted, that sounds... Yeah, there is a report going to policy and resources first.
Yeah, so that's
so that we can debate it clearer going forward.
I just thought it might be a good idea that things that came from previous meetings, that members were updated on things that were ongoing or like to be resolved in the future. So Maidstone United probably will be resolved before Christmas.
I would hope so, Councillor Nagy. Any more questions on the work programme? Oh, Councillor Ells.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry, I don't want to drag this out too long, but just really following on from Councillor Mrs Blackwell's point and, in fact, Councillor Nagy's point, when it comes to disposal of land at Hell Place, as I understood it previously, we had talked about having a discussion to create some sort of framework to help us make these decisions so that we don't go round and round the houses. We've got another land disposal coming up. I just wondered whether there's any chance of having this framework in place first. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ells. I'll ask Mrs Hudd to elaborate for you.
So following the last meeting where that was discussed, the Chief Exec took that away and a policy is being drawn up at the moment by the Director of Finance and Business Improvement and the Property Services team, and that policy will be going to Policy and Resources for adoption, and it will set out how we deal with all disposals of land in different circumstances. So that's being worked through at the moment. Once that's gone to P&R and been adopted, then that will provide the framework for the future decisions to be made, and that's why there's been a delay on bringing Hale Place and Maidstone United back, because it was thought that we shouldn't do that until that framework's in place.
Thank you. So that should be in place, should it, before we have to make the decision on Hale Place? That's lovely. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further questions on the forward plan? Thank you, members. Right, we've got two major items this evening, members. The first is item 12, Maidstone Parks and Open Spaces 10-year plan. Dawn Hudd is going to present this, and we have with us this evening Phil Newcomb and Jason Taylor, who are the experts in this. The plan has been developed with direct input from myself, Chair of HCL, obviously, and Councillor Diana Lewins, who's gone over it, I must say, with a magnifying glass, the nominated lead for the committee for this work stream. The report has been through various drafts and was presented in an earlier format to all member workshop. Tonight, members, we're not looking for any major changes or redrafts, but would accept minor amends or correction of factual inaccuracies. And on that, I refer you now to the amendments for the plan I have before you. I'll take them now. There's 3 on there. There's hopefully in red ink for you. If there are any comments, or please let me know now. Are there? Yeah, sorry. That's the loose sheet you've got. It amends page 38 and page 33 of the plan. Are you happy with those amendments? If they are, I'll take them as read. Yeah, the amendments in red. Yes, Councillor Batmore.
Just a quick question. Bearing in mind it says no new nature sites. Sometimes when you've got a planning application, you might have a specific area that's got, I don't know, lots of wildlife, and it's necessary to have a receptor site. Do we ever have receptor sites that are they then become designated nature reserves, or they form part of the biodiversity plan? I'm just trying to work out how it all slots together.
Okay. Before we go through this, I think it's best if Dawn Hudd presents this first, and then we get into it, and then we can actually go forward. So, yes, if I can ask Dawn Hudd to present the item. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members. Okay, so I'll remind members that the purpose of this plan was set out in a report that came to Heritage, Culture and Leisure Committee in March 16. And that report said that this project will look at the value and purpose of parks and open spaces in the borough and how we currently manage them. It will ultimately provide an outline of how we should manage them in the future to ensure their sustainability. It went on to say, having a clear adopted 10-year plan will enable us to make best use of the resources available to us, bid to any relevant funding schemes which become available, have a clear set of objectives which we have agreed with our stakeholders, ensure that we put in place the most efficient and effective management arrangements for the future, and encourage the use of our parks and open spaces by residents and visitors whilst contributing to the health and wellbeing agenda. So it was quite a big ask. The plan that you have before you tonight sets out how the challenges ahead will be met, using the evidence base produced for the local plan and the results of the resident survey. It explains the correlation between it and other NBC strategic documents and shared targets and objectives. The plan introduces priorities and principles that will shape our parks and open spaces in the future, with details of how these will be achieved. It presents a quality value matrix which will help ensure that the future resources are targeted at areas where they will have the biggest impact on the lives of residents and visitors, and provide a route map for the short, medium and longer term, ensuring that our parks and open spaces are well prepared for the challenges that lay ahead. This project has gone through several iterations with input from members and senior council officers. As the Chair has already said, himself and Councillor Lewins have been involved in its production, have received regular drafts of the document as it's progressed, and all councillors were invited to a workshop to enable wider comments and suggestions to be fed into the final document. There were 3 stages to developing the plan. The first was a review of our parks and open spaces, which included parks, play areas, allotments, sports pitches, semi and natural environment open space, and events, and how we manage and run them. Second was identifying issues we currently have with the ongoing management of our parks and open spaces, comparing how others deal with these issues and proposing solutions on how MBC can resolve these issues in the future. And the third stage was to produce the draft Parks and Open Spaces 10-year plan, incorporating all the work carried out in the first 2 stages. Following the initial research, visits were arranged to a number of exemplar parks to see how they were managed to have a positive impact on the lives of their residents and the visitors that use them. During these visits, the managers of these parks were interviewed regarding how they managed their parks. The cost of managing our parks and open spaces was reviewed, and analysis was carried out to look at what impact budget cuts would have on the service provision. The final document is set out in 3 parts. Part 1 states why our open spaces are so important and provides some background about Maidstone's open spaces. Part 2 sets out the challenges ahead, and Part 3 sets out the way forward, service priorities and principles, and the actions needed to achieve these. There are important links with a number of existing MBC documents, particularly the following: the Maidstone Biodiversity Action Plan, the Green and Blue Infrastructure Strategy, and the Health Inequalities Action Plan. And this document that you have tonight seeks not to repeat what's in those other documents, but to signpost to them where the relevant information lies. The priorities of our Parks and Open Spaces plan can be seen in the table on page 14 of the plan, and consists of the following priorities and principles. First priority is open spaces, supporting vibrant and healthy communities. The second is open spaces fit for the future. And the third priority is quality spaces and a quality service. There are 4 action areas, which are an open spaces estate which best serves Maidstone's needs, providing open spaces for a changing population, connected delivery with multiple benefits, and working smarter. It is recommended that HDL Committee adopts the Parks and Open Spaces 10-year plan to ensure high-quality, attractive parks and open spaces are provided to serve a range of needs for our current and future residents and visitors as Maidstone continues to grow. To ensure that provision of management of open spaces is sustainable in the future with less public sector funding. To address the difficult issues we are facing and provide a sound basis for decision-making. To ensure that parks and open spaces effectively support the delivery of Maidstone's strategic plan, and to provide clear direction which MBC and its partners can unite around. Once the plan is adopted, the Parks and Open Spaces team will implement the plan, and the first year's action plan will involve the groundwork to produce short, medium and long-term objectives for the next 10 years. This will include programming in the evaluation of sites using the value quality matrix contained within the plan. I think that's all I've got to say for now. So thank you for listening. Myself and Jason and Phil are happy to take any questions and answer them.
Thank you very much for that very detailed presentation. Councillor Harper, would you like to come forward on this item?
Thank you. I've read this item with great interest. It's issues which I've had a long interest in. I think one of the things, picking up almost one of the last points, which would be really important, is when you actually do the detailed planning. So you were saying that the first action will be looking at your medium and long-term planning, because that will give you timescales and actually clarity as to precisely what's planned to do over the next 10 years. I mean, this is obviously a broad overarching thing, but you need that detail, so that would be an important thing to work up. A number of points and a couple of questions. I mean, on paragraph 1.2, whilst parks and open spaces aren't necessarily seen as statutory services, I think it's important for people to remember that actually, technically, once you actually have a public open space declared, there are statutory considerations relating to it in terms of the legal requirements to maintain public care and safety. So, you know, that might be a useful thing for the committee to consider going forward in terms of vying with services such as housing and so on. And actually there are, if you look at it creatively, there are statutory underpinning reasons behind these services. One question I had when I started reading it was, we seem to differentiate, are you differentiating between open space and public open space? Because obviously public open space has certain designations and so on. And obviously there's a lot of references here to open space, so I just wanted to know, was there a differentiation or not?
Can I just take that question first?
Yep.
Thank you. Can Jason, would you like to answer that one?
Yes. Sorry, Sons of Mars. This refers to, this report is all about public open space, and this report particularly is about NBC-owned public open space, although it does reference other people's, but as their own. It's okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, that helps. I was going to say on page 19 of the agenda, we reference towards the end of that page where we've got a number of shortfalls, so things like community green space, children's play space, and natural and semi-natural green spaces and so on. I was going to ask about where the proposals were to sort of rectify those deficiencies, but I assume that they would come up more in that detailed action plan you're intending to do following the adoption of it. Yeah? Okay. Answers that one.
To some extent they will, but provision of new space will come through mostly through the planning system. It's not the job of the 10-year plan to identify new parks or open spaces or new amenity spaces. The job of the 10-year plan is to say how we'll look after the assets that we have over the next 10 years.
Can I come back on it? It's just that obviously one of the areas where you identify amenity green space deficiencies is in Fant. And literally knowing Fant, I can't actually see how you're going to go about rectifying that, because there's no spaces where planning applications can come in apart from Fant Farm. So it's just, you've identified there's a deficiency. How are we planning to, counteract it? Because planning applications won't be the way. There's nowhere left in Fant to actually build any houses and therefore create any amenity space, for instance. That's just one example. I just think, if we're saying there's these things, we need to think how we're rectifying them.
Thank you.
All of these deficiencies were identified in the green and blue infrastructure, which fed into the local plan. So the local plan should provide the opportunity, certainly, to request these. And it may be that we can't deal with these deficiencies, but it's very important that we know where they are and we try and deal with them as much as we can in the local plan. Is that okay?
Okay, going to page 20. I welcome the statement there on the second side of it, the sentence which is not Maidstone's intention to dispose of any of our parks and open spaces. I think following discussions at the council last year over Gatland Park, and which will be discussed again night after tomorrow, in respect to a planning application, I think that's quite an important principle for this council to hold on, because if a planning application does go through in 2 days' time, I suspect you'll be under great pressure to dispose of one of your main parks within a year or two. However, that's not obviously for tonight. One of the things I was looking at in terms of pages 22 and page 23, which is we're talking about the action areas and how we're going to contribute to our strategies. So under the action areas, we've got securing improvements to the transport infrastructure of our borough and in open spaces, provide safe off-road transport routes. And then on the next page, obviously linking that to the integrated transport plan in terms of walking and cycling. Now, if we are going to move these forward as sort of aims to do over the next 10 years, can I request that we actually look at how we, in terms of managing parks, at the moment cycling isn't permitted in our parks. However, if you read those two statements, it's that it's implying that we're going to encourage people to cycle in safe environments off the road and also use, create linkages for sustainable transport modes. So to do that, we're going to need to encourage people and to permit people to cycle through a large number of our parks, such as we've got the routes through Mote Park, and there'll be a number of other local parks where you equally could do, could create linkages to actually make cycling safer. But we need to make sure that we don't have conflicting policies, elsewhere which would stop that. So I think those are good things, but we need to make sure that we've got positive policies to promote cycling, because I know people have raised this with the council in the past and they've been told that cycling is not permitted in parks except on those routes through Mote Park, which has caused considerable concern in the past.
Do you have another question, Councillor Harper? Sorry.
Yeah, it was just understanding whether, in terms of moving those points forward to promote active cycling and walking and so on, and looking at parks as an asset where you can do it through, linkages, and it refers to that as, are we looking at encouraging people to cycle and permit people to cycle through parks rather than the situation now where you frequently have signs saying no cycling and so on? Because otherwise you're stating one thing and you're actually not actually enabling it to be put into practice. So I just seeking some understanding of what's been considered.
Can I just say first, I think we're talking of a document here that's going to be a very active document. We're not going to just finish tonight and put it in the cupboard and say, no, I just want to say that, the work that's gone into this is to make sure that this is going to actually be workable. But I'll bring Phil in at this point for you.
I think, Councillor, it's a very valid question, and obviously when on the action points, it's likely that that's going to be raised, because a lot of what goes forward into this is the health and well-being, and clearly, as you've highlighted, the green corridors and cycling and encouraging people to use other modes of transport. I mean, that obviously falls together in other policies as well. So I'd be very surprised if that's not raised as we go through management plans that are based on the quality value matrix that this starts off. But I think it's difficult to make a further comment on cycling directly.
Okay, thank you for that. Obviously, through my role with the Cycle Forum, I'm sure we'll engage in active discussion with yourselves in terms of how you might be able to take that forward. Just finally, I was just going to offer some assistance, if it might be of any help, on page 25, the first item there, which is a playing pitch strategy in sports facilities. When I was at Merton Council as Chair of Leisure and Libraries there, we actually commissioned a national level of research in terms of usage of sports pitches, in particular football, and looking at long-term trends and so on, and what the impact that would have on sports pitches. I'm quite happy. I've got a copy of the document at home. I, can happily share it with the officers who will be writing that up, if that will be of assistance. And that's the end on this.
Thank you, Councillor Harper. Thank you for that contribution. I'm sure we got some very useful information from that, and we will take your last suggestion forward, because it's very important that we do integrate everything into our plans going forward. Thank you. I'm going to go back to the amendments that we had on this on it. Oh, sorry. Yes. Any other visiting members wish to speak on this item? As I say, we go back to the amendments that were tabled, and you have a copy in front of you. Are we... I propose, unless we have any... Councillor Beckham, I'm sure you... Sorry.
I did, Chairman, and it related back to when we've got planning applications and you've got receptor sites for the movement of small animals, etc., or aspects of wildlife. Are any of those areas, or have they in the past then been created into small nature reserves? That's my first question. The second thing that worries me a little bit is we referred to the local biodiversity plan, but that's said 2009 to 2014. Do we have whatever the current version of that document is? Because shouldn't that be built into here? Otherwise, we're talking about something that's redundant. And I'm just intrigued to know how the Maidstone low emission strategy fits in with this as well.
If I can take one of your points first, it says in the report that the local biodiversity action plan will be refreshed and brought back to this committee. So that's one of the first pieces of work to be done once that this is. It will be a light touch refresh on the action plan because we're quite sure that not a great deal has changed since the last one was done. So it will be a light touch piece of work. On the receptor sites, I will let Phil answer that one.
I mean, currently we haven't turned any into nature reserves, but we have obviously, planning will take a lead on these items. We have used some of our land as receptor sites in the past, and it may well be if planning come to us and want a suitable area of natural green space, obviously that would be looked at as an improvement or an addition to our current open spaces, but that's not really what's in our document here.
May I just pick up on that, Chairman? Because surely receptor sites are incredibly important in the biodiversity plan, aren't they?
The receptor sites obviously are requested when planning is coming in with, if there's a builder coming in with a new build, and they're asking to see where the nearest adjacent sites are suitable. The sites have to be assessed as to whether they're suitable. We normally do a study on that. We do a phase 1 ecology study on that. Rather than just create a receptor site off the top of our heads. But it's important and it's relevant, but we're not ahead of the process. We're low down on the process. And they would approach us, or quite often ecologists employed by the builders would approach us on receptor sites, what's available and what is suitable. And that usually comes with funding, and that funding then can promote other nature works as well. So it is helpful and worthwhile considering.
Very much. Did you want to come back again?
I do actually, because of course that then prompts the question about financial commitments. What is our financial commitment in all of this? And I still haven't had an answer to the question about how the low emission strategy fits in with all of this. Also on page 33, I think I've spotted a spelling error. Sorry to be pedantic, but we've got parishes, parish apostrophe S, but I think you mean parishes plural, not one parish. Page 33. Penultimate line. Just a thought.
We don't know any. Yes, the emission strategy is currently being written. So, to be honest, we don't know exactly how the two fit together yet, but it was more of a case of, in this report, showing that there will be an emission strategy which will deal with air quality, and we don't need to try and deal with it in the parks plan, because there's a bigger strategy that sits above this. Is that okay?
Can I just add to that, Chairman? I think the reason we put it in was because there was a question at the member workshop around air quality and the role of parks and open spaces in dealing with air quality. And what we're saying here is that will be dealt with through the low emissions strategy. And if there are any links, they will be forthcoming through that document.
You're not...
I'm sorry, Chairman, I'm not convinced. I'll tell you why, because I just think if you're going to include something that has yet to be written, there's probably a whole host of documents that have yet to be written that need to be considered. And also, why not just include everything that already exists? For example, there'll be aspects of the local plan that will be affected. They'll have some sort of effect on parks and open spaces. I just feel we're putting in bits and leaving out other bits. That was all.
Sorry, Councillor Cox.
Just appertaining to what Councillor Blackmore's saying, on page 23, where you're looking at the grids that they've got here, the supporting strategies, it sort of encompasses them because it mentions them. They may not be up to date, but I think it's better to mention the strategies that are listed and then them be brought up to date, so you don't have to then go back and amend the ones that have different dates on. So if it says the green and blue infrastructure strategy, it doesn't say when it's from and to, because it's going to be amended and brought up to date. So I think it is in there. With the receptor sites, Vinters Valley Trust is one of our receptor sites in Maidstone for this type of thing. We don't just accept everything because there's a level at which you can't then sustain more of the reptiles coming. But I think there are various receptor sites, but they then can't be sort of open spaces or else we're back to needing to move the reptiles. So I think there is a crossover, but I don't think it's listed here as to where receptor sites are or where they could be. That was a valid point.
Just like to say from the Chair, this is obviously a working document and we've got to kick it off somewhere. I think wherever you drop this in, when it's been in gestation now for almost 2 years, things would be coming up to date and being refreshed. So I think going forward, and as Councillor Cox has just indicated, it is in the draft. So. Councillor Perry, you indicated you'd like to speak.
Yes, I'm not proposing to change anything, but I've got one question and one observation. I have to say, it's on page 19. There's a delicious sense of irony here because under allotments, where you've got deficient in most of the Maidstone urban area, which I understand, and Staplehurst. Well, the reason they're deficient in Staplehurst is because, sadly, when the Maidstone Rural District Council was merged into the Borough Council, all the documentation was lost, and we lost our legal control over the allotments, and they all were grabbed by a housing association. So there's a little bit of a reason for that, and we've been trying to get the allotments back ever since, but failed miserably up to date. So there's a rather sense of irony there, I think. But I've got a question, and it's on the page 25. It's which is, I think, a very important area, which is the Maidstone Playing Pitch Strategy and Sports Facility Strategy. You've got draft, I understand that. But when will this be ready? Do you know? I mean, presumably you must have some idea of this, because I think it's quite an important issue, the whole issue of sports facilities.
Thank you,
it's just a question.
I'll ask Jason to answer that if you may. Thank you.
Yes, it's currently being written. Planners are writing it at the moment, and the first draft is, well, I've seen a very early draft. The plan is to have that adopted, and it's something we have to do as part of the local plan, and again later on this year. So it's imminent.
Sorry,
Can I just clarify on
that one?
That's a different document. The item on the forward plan for this committee is the play area strategy. The item referred to on page 25 of the minutes is a local plan policy document for play pitches and sports pitches.
Was that clear? We're not in the long grass. Sorry, Councillor Ells.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry, I won't take many seconds. I think this is a very good document. There's obviously a lot of work has gone into this. And what you end up with when you read through it is an awful lot of common sense, and it's very hard to plan and to write common sense. So I think it's very good as a general thing to give us a framework to work to for the next 10 years. There's just a couple of things. One, I'm also a pedant and had highlighted the errant apostrophe, so you're not the only one. This is a 10-year plan. Is there anything in it that in, say, 7 or 8 years' time, we start to look ahead at the next 10 years, or do we need to start again? Was my only question, I think. Thank you.
So, I mean, as we said, there'll be annual meetings to get together of the board that decide what they're going to do. So if after, in the initial meeting, they're going to agree long, short and medium-term plans. So it could be very early on that they look at years 7 and 8 to start producing a new plan going forward. So that will be up to the members of that.
Just want to say, going forward from the Chair, that I think we're reviewing this yearly. There's an update coming to this committee every year going forward, so we will have updates. Do you have a second question, Councillor Rouse? No, I thought you had two.
No, it's all right.
No, you don't have to. It's not compulsory.
No, it's not a compulsory question. Just on the proving to be a complete pedant bit, on page 26, under the challenges ahead, it says budgetary pressures are ongoing with government funding having ending. Should that be ended? That's it. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Hinder, you wish to speak? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not sure whether I should be asking at this stage. Can I just refer to page 24, the Maidstone Play Area Strategy? And I did speak to Jason about this earlier in the year. It's to do with the amount in Grove Green. We have some, I believe, 2 strategic play areas. Well, one in Grove Green and one in Pennington Heath. Now, my residents tell me that that is supposed to be walkable in 12 minutes from where they live, taking the bottom end of Grove Green. That is absolutely impossible. If you've got a mum with kids in a buggy and a kid, sort of toddler walking, that is absolutely impossible. And I just wanted to know, is that going to be reviewed? I think we did discuss this, Jason, at one time. Is this the right place now where residents need to write in and tell you about this? Or is this going to be reviewed? I think you said at one stage it was likely to be reviewed. Can you just clarify that for me, please?
Yes, it will be reviewed as it is put together. And obviously what will be brought to this committee will be a draft. If there are any changes or any comments to be made from that, we can do that then.
Thank you for that. Would that be at that meeting that is obviously brought to this committee, would that be the stage where my residents come along and actually tell you about their views, or are you actually looking at the time distance, where this walking distance of 12 minutes?
If that's one that you've brought to our attention, we can have a look at that and do that beforehand, so it can be reviewed before it comes to this meeting. So we've spoken about that, so I'll make sure that I come back to you and get more information, or I'll check it out myself. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Chairman. I see that the river isn't included in this, but it could almost be, couldn't it?
Yes. Initially, the river was included, and when we did the green and blue infrastructure, we actually started measuring all of the blue space as it was that we had. But it soon became clear that, firstly, the blue space, there's not a lot we can do about. We can't build lakes. We can build ponds on a small scale. We can't move rivers to wards that don't have rivers. And when we looked, the real value was in the land alongside the rivers. So most of those are included as parks, as amenity. So yes, they are all included, but it's the dry land that we dealt with as part of this. So for instance, in the town centre, the river park is all included, where people have access to the river. So yes, it was thought about, but it was included in the other green space types.
Any further questions, members? Councillor Lewins, as you are a great, not a great architect, an architect of this, do you have anything you wish to ask or you wish to clarify?
No, I'm fine with everything, actually. Very good, thank you.
Members, I propose to go back to these amendments I had at the beginning of the meeting. Can we agree those or not now? You have them in red ink on that page. It's mostly where we've made the adjustments. It's implementing the matrix, and it says consideration by experienced staff, and then elected representatives, that is members. There's just one word on the 106, such was taken out. And NBC nature reserves sentence has been added. Any opportunity to create a new nature reserves will be considered on their individual merits with regard to relevant national guidelines and their sustainability. Are we seconding those? Do you wish to speak on it? Do you wish to speak on it? Do you wish to speak on it? No. Okay. Councillor Blackmore.
Can I just query one thing? In the first sentence where you've got experienced staff and elected representatives, experienced, what do you actually mean by that? Are you saying senior staff? Are you talking about those at director level? Are you talking about, say, for example, Mr. Taylor, because that's his area of expertise? It could almost mean anyone. It doesn't necessarily mean they have experience in this particular area. I just wanted to know what the thinking was.
I think we were referring to the professional staff in this area of expertise, so happy to amend that.
Do you mean planners then, or just...
No, this is implementing the matrix that we're going to put all the sites through. So it'll be Phil's Parks and Open Spaces team and the professional staff within that team that do it.
Is that clear? I think we can regard most of our team here as experienced. Thank you very much. Right, members, can we take that as, can we agree that it's amended as read? Agreed. Thank you very much. To the recommendation on page 7, that the Heritage, Culture, Leisure Committee adopt the Parks and Open Spaces 10-year plan as Appendix 1. Thank you very much, Councillor Cox.
Am I proposing or seconding? I don't mind.
Would you like to second?
I'll be happy to second it for you.
Okay, thank you very much. I propose that from the Chair and you second it. Thank you very much. Members, can we vote on that, whether this is to be adopted as written? Including the amendment, sorry. That's unanimous. Thank you very much, members. Thank you. Can I just say that's going to be a good working document going forward with changes, but obviously we now have a very robust and workmanlike plan. Thank you very much. Can I thank the officers for their contributions? And I think I ought to say thank you to Philip Newcombe, who I believe will be leaving us shortly. Thank you very much for what you've done, and all the best for your future. I'm sorry, gentlemen, you've already got your jackets off. I'm not saying you should do any more. Thank you. I know it's a hot evening. We are very lucky with this summer. Members, we now move on to item 13, Museum 20-year plan. Victoria Barlow, Director, will be presenting, but before she does, I just want to say a few words on it. In January 2015, HCL committee tasked officers with shaping an ambitious vision for the museum service over the next 20 years. A key part of that process was to be establishment of an independent strategic board. The leader and the chairman of HCL were appointed to the board to represent heritage, culture and leisure and were closely involved with the development of the plan. The board also included representatives of KCC, Arts Council England and private enterprise. The board has met regularly and had some robust discussions about how best the museums can serve the people of Maidstone. The museum director has also briefed this committee on the current activity at the museum, and I would say now on several occasions. There is no intention at this time to look at provisional major changes to the plan as presented, but questions and typographical errors, I just about managed to say that, are welcome, and the museum director will address those, but I don't anticipate any change to the substance of the report, which you have had before you. So at this point, I just add to that the whole would be for us to endorse the direction the museum is taking this evening, and on that point I'll ask Victoria to present. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members. The report that I'm presenting this evening is actually the report of the Museum Strategic Board. As Chairman said, that Strategic Board was brought together last year in response to the report previously in 2015. The board have been absolutely resolute in providing challenge as well as ideas and support for us as officers, and the report that comes to you now is very much owned by the board as a whole. The vision that the board were set to explore had to be ambitious. It had to set the museum back on the top rung of the county's museums. We know that we've got the largest collections in the county. We happen to think we have the best collections in the county. And the vision is about putting the museum back up where it belongs in that hierarchy while improving financial and organisational resilience. The board identified that in order to achieve that position, there would need to be root and branch review of the museum's purpose, its financial resilience, its ability to be entrepreneurial, the experience that it actually offered to the people of Maidstone, and their relationship with the museum. So the report lays out in 3 sections the position of the 3 museums covered by the report currently. So I probably should add that those 3 museums over 2 sites are the Maidstone Museum and Bentcliffe Art Gallery, the Queen's Own Royal West Kent Regimental Museum, both in St Faith Street, and the Maidstone Carriage Museum at the Tithe Barn. Sorry. So the report lays out our current position in terms of the cost of the service, the collections that we have, and the reach of the museum service. Secondly, it lays out the opportunities that are there for us to grasp. Now, I wouldn't want you to think that we were being naive about the challenges. We're absolutely not. We know what's there. But the board as a whole felt very strongly that we have a very firm base on which to build in terms of the museum services, collections, the history of the service, the buildings that we own, and the stories that there are to be told in this our county town. So the third element of the report identifies the vision for the service both as a leader in its field and a valued resource for residents. And this was something that very strongly we felt that modern museums need to be more than a storage home for old things. Whether that counts for my team, I wouldn't like to comment, but modern museums need to learn, I think, from where libraries have come in recent years, in that they have looked more widely about their general purpose. They've invited people in, not as customers or as clients, but as partners, as owners and supporters. And so the vision that you'll see here is very focused on using our collections at the heart of everything we do, but using them in a way that actually inspires people to new experiences, to create memories, and to share their own stories with other people in the town. The next stage that will need to happen after the production of the report is that we need, much like my colleagues in Parks, to create the detailed action plan over the next few years. So that will be produced in consultation with members, with our staff, external stakeholders such as the board, but also other possible funders and accreditation givers, but also the people of Maidstone. And we have laid out that I think it's important that we don't say that we have this vision that's going to involve the people of Maidstone without actually giving those people the chance to shape that vision as well. And there are a number of ways we will do that, as are appropriate to each particular part of the process. So at this stage, we would like to ask members to adopt the plan and the vision so that our next steps will be a confident movement towards the fulfilment of that vision. And I will take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victoria. Obviously, I probably should have declared an interest, but obviously I am on the board and have worked very closely with the team in the museum on this. So I could probably take questions myself, but that's not what I need to do. Members, do you have any questions? Councillor Hinder. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for that, Victoria. It was very interesting. I actually came to one of the lates last Thursday evening. My husband and I really enjoyed it. It was lovely. We sat out in the courtyard. We had a lovely glass of wine from Hush Heath Nurseries, which was lovely. And it was a lovely summer evening. My husband was saying that he felt it was a pity that not more people were there. And we were wondering how much this is advertised, because I feel if it was advertised more, maybe more people would come. Because it was a really, really lovely evening. And, the people with their different crafts they'd done, it was really lovely. And I hope to see more of that, because it was definitely worthwhile, especially with the music in the cafe. It was lovely. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. We had about 100 people attending last Thursday. The Lates are a programme that are growing and developing in numbers. We do find that we advertise those events through our What's On leaflet. We also use social media, which hits the sort of intended, perhaps age group. I think one of the issues for us last Thursday actually was that we had fully booked tours and a couple of people didn't come along on the evening. We've actually got a meeting internally to review that. There is a thought amongst the team that perhaps because although people book for those things, they are free, therefore people don't lose anything if they don't come. Also, after a week of glorious heat and sunshine, where I think a lot of people booked up, we did have rain in that 48-hour period just before it, which I have to say is always frustrating when you have one of those kind of events. But it certainly isn't something that we're taking lightly. Not least, we're getting feedback as well from the stall holders. This was a pretty new way of doing it. We've had our beer, I think we had beer and cheese previously, where we were notably let down by the cheese provider on one occasion, and it became a beer evening. But I think that the Lates as a whole are something that we are reviewing and are very invested in making successful. Thank you.
Councillor Hastie.
Thank you. I'd probably being a bit simple. Don't laugh. The stock held for the shop in the running costs. Yes. Is that 29,800? Is that stock that you currently hold in the shop, or is that stock that you're planning on bringing in, or that's bought in?
There we go. So that amount actually includes the the budget for buying stock for the coming year, and it includes a small stock holding. So there's about £5,000 worth of stock that we hold, and I think it's 24,000 for purchase.
Thank you very much. Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Chairman. I was just looking at the running costs are not insignificant when I look at it on page 67. Now, I was concerned that the throughput seems to have dropped for 2016-17, which does kind of worry me. And then you also say under funding that it's going to be challenging, which I would agree with you, I think. Have you considered any form of charging? Because you talked about people coming in free, and I'm just wondering whether in the future should be some form of charge. I mean, museums, I work a lot on the continent, and every museum I go into, I have to pay. Not very much, but I do pay something. And it doesn't seem to stop the footfall going through the museum. So I'm just wondering whether in the future some consideration should be given to this. I mean, I'm in favour of the museum, don't get me wrong. I think it's a great thing to have, and it's a great attraction, but obviously it has to fund itself properly. And given the financial constraints we're all on, it has to compete. I'm sorry to say that, but it's... so I think we need to think of ways of funding this, both the revenue and the capital funding as well.
I'll answer that. You're quite right. Just on the footfall issue, first of all, we had a real anomaly with the Lego exhibition 2 years ago, which pushed the numbers through the roof and looks like it's a benchmark, but it'd be very hard to repeat that. And then the numbers this year have declined because we're actually closed on Mondays now, so we've got less people coming through the museum. We are having a massive marketing drive with the comms team to push figures back up and get people through the door. On the funding, you're quite right. When we had a budget away day, members brought that issue up. I think it was actually yourself, Councillor Perry, who mentioned charging at the away day. And at that time, members felt it wasn't something that they wanted to do at this time, but it certainly hasn't been ruled out. And when we're developing the action plan for the 20-year plan, we'll be looking at the funding models, given a reduction in funding from the council going forward, and how we will meet those reductions in funding. So it will certainly be considered. It's not something we'd want to do lightly. Having a free museum, is a fantastic attraction for Maidstone. And I think a lot of the younger people that we get in and the young mums with toddlers might be put off by having to pay even a nominal amount to get in. We are looking at different new governance models, and a report will be coming to this committee in September, which will have the results of that work that we're doing at the moment, which will look at what is the best governance model for the museum going forward, in terms of it being sustainable and viable, and that will look at different options such as trusts for the museum to be run from, which could deliver significant savings for us and open up new funding streams that the council can't currently access.
Sorry, Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Chairman. There was some talk about the Monday close year as to whether perhaps it could be reviewed during the holiday period. Has there been any further thought on that?
We just haven't got the budget to do that because we'd have to staff the museum, and for it to be open we have to have a core number of staffing, and we just haven't got the budget to do it. So it's not something we can consider at this time. However, in the 20-year plan, one of the things that the board, the Museum Strategic Board, wants to consider in the development of the 20-year plan is, can we have a 7-day-a-week museum? And so it's something that they will be looking at going forward.
I'll just add to that from the chair that yes, we would like to see a 7-day museum, because obviously people don't just come into Maidstone. Maybe the only day they visit, and it may be a Monday when they can't go in, which is a shame. So we are looking at that. Sorry, I've got Councillor Cox.
Thank you very much, Chairman. A couple of points. On page 57, where we're talking about the different audiences, do the schools interact with you about things coming up with new curriculum items and where you can link in with the different key stages and indeed down to the exam topics that are being brought up in the future, thinking about the links there. I'm very much interested and also seeing where you're talking about governance. You know, I'm on the QEQM, so I'm aware of all that, but also bringing the Tyrwhitt Drake Museum of Carriages and under the same umbrella, I think makes every sense. I've mentioned it in either that meeting that we should have some sort of carriage at the museum and something from the museum at the carriages, and then something at Cobtree to say, go to the museum, because it's this free linking that I think is important. I've certainly noticed the use of social media from the comms team and from the museum. I'm following Twittering and Facebooking, whatever. So I can certainly see that a lot is being done from the officers and staff, and I think the figures will come up. Also, what will enhance it are such offerings as the Games evening, or the whole of that exhibition, because the Lego cost us money to have there, but it did bring more footfall. But I think the more we can link in with what's happening in the town, and particularly the schools, I think that will increase our footfall. I think where you've been and you've enjoyed the evening, Councillor Hinder, the best way is to tell other friends, and the next one, take another 3 people, and we've suddenly got 400 people. But other than that, I thought it was a very concise report. Some of the points as well about Museum Cafe being brought in-house. Certainly with our progress being made in other cafe areas, I hope that's very seriously being looked at. Other than that, thank you very much for answering the questions.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I don't want to steal Victoria's thunder, and I have mentioned this before, but hopefully when Tarkush is reinstalled with our new Ancients Gallery, and the publicity that will ensue from that, hopefully that will really generate some visitors, because it's going to be really superb. And I know that, for instance, don't want to spoil the fun, but you better walk in and see the face of Tarkush in life. And there's going to be television programmes and everything. So I think that's really going to generate a focus on the museum going forward. And can I just say, we're talking about beer and cheese and wine, and you know, this is an added attraction at the museum. We must remember that it is an education establishment and promoting the artefacts. The fact that we do have a glass of wine is an extra bonus. And I didn't want to give the impression to go out that it's not a nightclub, but we do have very good late nights. Yes, please. Coming back in on the education. Yeah.
Yes, just to come back to your question about schools. Our learning officer is actually a former teacher. So she's very used to dealing with changes to the curriculum, understanding where those areas are. She attends regular meetings of local teachers and school family groups. And just last week, she was addressing a meeting of 99 of the local newly qualified teachers coming into schools in the area, presenting to them about what we already provide, but also asking them to talk to us about what they would like to see and those areas that they want to see developed. So we have a great relationship with local schools and schools widely across Kent.
Thank you for that, Victoria. Dawn, you wanted to come in there on a few more points?
I just wanted to pick up on Chairman's mention of the Takush exhibition. We've actually got our old reception area reopening in the next 2 weeks. 3 weeks, 3 weeks, okay, by the end of the month. By the end of the month. It's looking absolutely fabulous, and that's going to be a visitor information point where people can come in. They specifically want tourist information, and one of the key performance indicators that this committee asked for is to measure how many inquiries we're getting for tourism, and we'll be monitoring all that through that new area. And the cafe is being run in-house at the moment, and we've just launched a brand new menu and advertising for that this week. So I encourage you all to go in and use the museum cafe. It's a fabulous menu on offer now down there. So thank you.
Can I just hold Councillor Perry and Councillor Blackmore? I apologise to Councillor Harper. Would you like to come forward now and put your questions?
Thank you. It's more a point rather than a question. I think, as everybody said, this is a very good report and builds a firm basis for going forward. But I just wonder if there was one way it could possibly be enhanced. And it was just a small suggestion, and it would need someone, if they wanted to move an amendment. But in the short-term next steps, which is on page 65, and so in years 1 to 5, I was just wondering if you could add in, potentially, if someone wanted to move it, a review of potential outreach services to be undertaken. Because whilst this is a very good report, and I support everything in it, it's a very building-based report. And I think like museum services in the 21st century aren't just about being building-based. They're about outreach, and they're about getting out into the communities. And I think we should be thinking about how we can do the same with our museum service. So whilst we've got the buildings and people can go to the buildings, we should also be taking what we have in those buildings out to the community. And that's done across the country, and I'm sure we do it here as well. But I just thought if we had a specific action point on it in there, that would help the officers in terms of, you know, looking at that in more detail, potentially getting external funding to help it. Because, I mean, you could do things like pop-up exhibitions in parks and so on. We talk about park strategy and encouraging greater... You know, there's a whole load of synergies you could do if you had, you know, if you actually enhanced that area of service provision. So it's really just, perhaps if officers were happy to put that in, or if members were happy to put that in, just to... Yeah.
Thank you very much, Victoria.
Thank you. Yeah, what I would say is that absolutely that's part of the vision very strongly is about the museum buildings being a shop window for everything we do, and the fact that we want to be a museum service for the whole borough and not just for the centre of Maidstone. So we are looking at how we work with people in those places where they are day in, day out. I have to say we don't do as much as we could at the moment. We work very much in outreach with schools. Some of those community projects on an outreach basis have been limited in the past just out of the capacity and the number of staff we've had. But absolutely, it's a very key part of the vision for the future.
Thank you very much. Councillor Perry.
Yes, thank you. Before we get too carried away, I'm a bit concerned about the outreach too much because we've got a funding issue here. And I think we need to stabilise that a bit more before we go rushing out. I understand the enthusiasm, and I don't want to dampen it, but I think we've got a little bit care here. Two other points. The visitors' centre, I'm a bit nervous of this because you close on a Monday, so where do all the visitors go if they want the information? And as far as I understand, downstairs here, this is going to be empty in a couple of weeks' time. And I'm just wondering why we don't have the information centre back in the town hall. In nearly every town I know, you go to the town hall. Certainly. Well, maybe we have, but all I'm saying is I just think it's a bit strange to have the visitor centre not in the centre of the town because people don't pick it up, and it's closed on a Monday. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me, with due respect. And one final point. The carriage, I like the idea of the carriage being brought into the museum. I love carriages myself. But I still strongly support the presentation given by Councillor Round and Jamie Freeman about the idea of having a longer-term strategy, maybe, or a few years, of bringing the Carriage Museum with the other transport history all together, because they are part of the same connection. And certainly, if you've got the aerodrome at Headcorn Aerodrome, then you have room to drive the carriages as well. And as a carriage driver myself, and I have competed at quite a high level in the carriage driving world, I would love to do that, because there's some very beautiful carriages there. But that's a personal thing, Chairman. But I do support the proposal, so I think it's a very good idea, I think, for the future of the Carriage Museum.
I'll take your points in order. So how do people access visitor information on a Monday or a Sunday, because we're not open on Sundays in the winter? They can do it online and through the telephone. We have a telephone line that is manned by staff, so there is access to that. We haven't had any complaints at all since we closed on a Monday from many visitors not being able to access information, and we have monitored that really carefully to see if there was any adverse reaction. Although you're right, downstairs, the current occupiers downstairs are moving out, we are working hard with Property Services to find another tenant that would be able to work with us on providing information. But the information point downstairs and the leaflets is just one of many across the whole of the borough where we give out these kinds of leaflets and information. So we're not wholly dependent on it. And the reason that it was moved out of here was, one, down to cost and resources. We have a multidisciplinary team at the museum who do visitor information and museum services. Their job descriptions are generic, and they all do both services. And we simply couldn't afford to reopen a service back down here because we'd have to staff it. And we'd have to have more staff because we have to have a minimum number of people in the museum to keep it open because of the size of the building. Just on the Carriage Museum, that is in the 1 to 5 year plan for Victoria to do a complete options appraisal for the Carriage Museum in its current location. I will say at this point in time, because it is referenced in the report, the strategic board for the museum are very keen to keep a carriage museum in Maidstone Town Centre as a visitor attraction, but they're also very keen to make it a better visitor attraction for more people to go to it, because at the moment it isn't very well visited. However, they are keen to keep a watchful eye on what's happening at Headcorn and see if there's any opportunity in the future to have a carriage presence at Headcorn perhaps as well.
From the chair members, I have a personal view that we should have more information in the town hall area, and if we have an opportunity to look at the new tenants, we have a spinner downstairs for those who has a leaflet in it. I think access and perhaps more information would be good, because as we know, people do come to the town hall. The town centre is here, and there's no information in the bus lanes or anywhere else. You have to go to the museum. So I do think that needs looking at going forward, and we may have an opportunity to look at that. Councillor Beckmore, I think you wanted to come in.
I did. Thank you, Chairman. I'm really interested in the wine and culture evenings that are about to start happening at the museum. What a fantastic idea, because I think it hits a whole bunch of buttons. Brilliant idea. Wine culture, bit of jazz, throw it all out there. Much better than sitting in a drafty park where you get cold at 10 o'clock at night. But everyone likes different things. Sorry, love the parks as well. On a slightly more serious note, I'm really pleased that the governance review is taking place, because I think anything we can do to ensure future funding is incredibly important. I think to rely on the Borough Council going forward in perpetuity, bearing in mind what's going on with the devolution of gender, I'm not wholly convinced Maidstone Borough Council will exist in its current format in 3 years' time. So I think anything that can be done to shore that up really has to be looked at. On that, I'm quite concerned under the long term, where you have resilient governance and funding achieved. In my opinion, that should be in your medium-term goals, not in your long-term goals. Because I think if we've got the new governance model that's going to be introduced, to then have that item so far out, I think, is wrong, in my opinion. Carriage Museum in town or out of town, we had a presentation about the Headcorn Aerodrome. I've got a funny feeling that just outside Staplehurst there is a farm vehicles small display museum thing as well, to put that all together with other doings of transport. Doings, I can't think of the word, I'm so sorry, but you know what I mean. Items, something to display. If you could have this is what we had in the 17th century, and then we moved it on to carriages, and then we've got whatever, chuck in some trains as well. You could have something fabulous, couldn't you, that really puts the borough on the map. And talking of putting the borough on the map and maps, you've got to address parking issues in the medium term. How on earth are you going to do that at the museums? Because it's just not there. There's no space.
Thank you. What I would say about that table, that perhaps, I think perhaps that the table was meant to be illustrative. I think perhaps another time I might have left out the detail in that table. It doesn't properly represent where we are in our consideration. You're absolutely right. There is no way we can leave the governance to that stage. In terms of parking, it is an issue, actually, that we are constantly working with our colleagues, particularly in economic development, around about understanding where new provision may come from, and recognising that we aren't suddenly going to get a car park at the main museum. There are options for parking around the Carriage Museum, which is quite a positive, but also we're looking at how we deal with a museum that doesn't have on-site parking. So, for example, we have invited operators of tour groups and coach operators to come on a familiarisation visit, because actually there are options for dropping off right by the museum and then parking up. And what we want to do is work with those providers to say, OK, your driver may not be able to come in with the group, and traditionally you would give them a sandwich lunch. So perhaps from our cafe, once you've dropped off your passengers, we give you the lunch that you would normally get, your little freebie anyway, and you take that with you, you park up, you come back at an agreed time to collect your group. We can manage small groups. So, for example, minibus types. We last year got some marked out parking just beside the museum for that, and there are other sites coming up. But you're right, we have to work with what's there rather than dreaming of something that isn't going to be there.
Thank you very much, Councillor Blackmore.
Sorry, can I just come back on that? There's another issue associated with the parking, which is taking someone who's disabled to the museum. It's actually quite difficult if you've got to drop them, then go and park, which obviously isn't very close by, and then come back. So I think, does that stop parents of disabled children? My feeling is yes, unless there's quite a big family group. So I know the museum in parts is disability compliant, but it also stops people from going there. I don't know how you address it. I'm sorry, I wish I could think of a solution for you. But it is something that does need looking at.
I wish you could think of a solution for us, but it's one of those tricky things. We do have a space at the side of the museum, right by the entrance, which, if we know people are coming, we would let them park in. That relies on people getting in touch with us in advance and booking that space almost. Of course, that's not the level of accessibility that we want to operate at. It's a compromise, and that's what we're working with at the moment. It's an issue that we deal with generally. Access to the park with cars is quite an issue for us. We park in a staff car park, so there are spaces, but really how we publicise that and how we manage that for the general visitor who just wants to turn up and come in is an ongoing issue, but it's not one that we're ignoring.
Okay, are there any more? Councillor Hinder.
Thank you, Chair. Just very quickly, Victoria, I can't see what the footfall is in the Carriage Museum. Can you give me a figure on what the actual, bearing in mind I know it's only open so many months of the year. Thank you.
It's single figures of thousands. I got a horrible feeling it's about 6,000, but I can circulate the actual figure because it will do.
Councillor Balla.
Thank you, Chairman. I know that you get a lot of school visits to the museum, but do you get school visits to the Carriage Museum?
Thank you. This is another one of our issues. We don't get visits to the Carriage Museum. The real problem that we have down there is that there isn't a space in which to teach a class or take a class. We are quite prepared to do guided tours for schools. We also don't have facilities, so we have one very small and rather elderly staff toilet, but we haven't got the kind of facilities that you actually need to bring in a school group. It's an area of great frustration to us. Obviously, the carriage collection offers massive opportunities around the science, technology and engineering agenda, and it's something that as part of the development of that museum or whatever we do with the carriages in the future has to be a key consideration.
Councillor Perry.
Very quick. That's a very good argument, actually, for putting it to Headcorn, because the footfall at Headcorn Aerodrome is very high. It's one of the most popular destinations, I believe, in the county. And obviously with the links with the aircraft and all the other transport, it would make it a very, very strong case to move it down. And the carriages, I mean, I know I've owned carriages myself, and I know how difficult they are to keep. And the maintenance on them is very high. And that building they're currently in is not a good place to keep vintage carriages, believe me. Thank you. That's all I want to say.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I would say about the Headcorn bid is that they very generously invited me to be part of the development board of that. So I have been in touch with what's going on and taking an active part in that. The one thing I would say about our carriages, although their environment is for a museum what we would technically call hideous, we're very lucky in that that is the museum term for it. Actually, the carriages themselves are not deteriorating. They have acclimatised over the 50, 60 years that they've been there. So we give them a good clean. They were collected in original condition. So essentially, they were collected at the end of their lives, and we haven't refurbished them. So they get gentle care. We make sure that they're not getting any worse. But you're right. One of the things that we need to think about with that move is actually, would they like a shiny new environment? We don't know is the short answer. We will be consulting.
Thank you very much. I'll take one more. Councillor Batmore.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a quick thing. On page 68, under threats, you've got trust leaving, and there's got a little kiss after it, which I thought was very touching. Maybe it's not a text message, I don't know. Maybe it was trust leaving and actually taking that out because you felt it was a little bit too potent. The other thing is you've got as an opportunity the STEAM agenda at the Carriage Museum. And I've got to be honest with you, with a sciencey background, I just think there's more we can and should be doing, whether that's in conjunction with schools, whether that's with Kent University. I don't know. I just feel it's a wasted opportunity because haven't we got to train something like 200,000 engineers over the next 5 years? Is that right? But I do think there's a huge opportunity there, and I don't know whether that then means if this was converted to a trust, whether there is something down the education funding stream the museum may be able to access in future.
Okay, thanks. First of all, on the trust, no, I think that's just fat fingers, frankly. And on the STEAM agenda, you're quite right. The Arts Council member on our board is, in fact, our relationship manager for museums. He made it abundantly clear that there is Arts Council funding very strongly for that STEAM agenda. It's, for us, it's the one big area that we don't deal well with at the moment, and that's why it's an opportunity and not a weakness, because it's something we actually want to deal with, and it's how we do that.
Just squeeze one.
Just one little thing. Is that a conversation you and I could have offline? Because I think I've got a couple of ideas for you that may be able to be progressed.
Absolutely. Come down. We'll give you a bit of coffee and a slice of cake. That's not a bribe.
I don't need coffee. I don't need coffee or cake, but a glass of water would be lovely. Thank you.
I like negotiations like that. Just copy me in. Members, I think Victoria's now got plenty of homework and plenty of information we've given to her. Are we now happy to progress to the recommendations? I'll take them one at a time. There's only two, sorry. Number one, that the museum's 20-year plan attached as Appendix 1 be adopted. Have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Lewins. All in favour? Is that? Okay, you're up? Unanimous. Thank you very much. And two, that the museum's strategic board be given approval to develop a detailed action plan in pursuit of fulfilling of the plan.
Sorry, Chairman. Would that then be coming back to the committee so we can actually have a look at it to see what it involves, rather than it just goes off when we never ever see it again? Please. Thank you.
No, I think
and then I'd be happy to second it if you propose
I think
it.
that's fair and right. That should happen, and that can be arranged going forward. Because again, like the other one, it's very important that we get it right. Actually, both counts tonight that we would ask officers to come back to us if they felt that we couldn't achieve either the Parks tenure or this one going forward. We need to know fairly quickly if there was a problem. Sorry, can I just take that again? We voted. We hadn't voted on two. Can we just take that vote again, please? All those. Oh, I hadn't got a second to the two.
We're voting on recommendation.
Recommendation 2. The Museum Board. Unanimous. Thank you, members. That was unanimous. Thank you very much. It's really gratifying to see that we have a real rich culture in Maidstone, and we're going to be promoting that going forward. We have an excellent museum. We just need to, as he keeps on saying, blowing our trumpets for it. And also with our parts. We reconvene on September the 5th. So whatever you're doing, I wish you a happy recess. Enjoy your breaks. And if that concludes the business of tonight, I now declare the meeting closed.